There's a dark side of living in Italy that not many people talk about. And as I've made it my mission on this channel since 2021 to share with you the reality of life in Italy, it seems only right that I talk about it today in this video because there are 5 areas, I would say, that not many people speak about, but can really reveal an uglier side to living in Italy, and a more challenging one at that. When I moved here in 2018, I moved here completely naive, and I didn't even consider these 5 aspects that I'm going to talk about today. But I can honestly tell you they proved to be some of my biggest challenges when I first started setting up my life. So to prepare yourself for these can give you some kind of buffer, if you like, when you first move to this country. So the first thing that I really want to share with you that people don't really talk about is that starting over isn't glamorous. I know that when you decide that you want to move to Italy, it feels really exciting. It feels romantic. It feels full of possibility and opportunity. You feel like you're going to improve yourself in some way. You're going to embrace a new culture and live this incredible La Dolce Vita life that has been presented to you through the internet, social media, websites, whatever it may be. But the reality is, starting over is not glamorous at all, because apart from the fact that you have these possibilities and opportunities and all of the positive sides that do indeed come with deciding to make a decision like this in your life, the other side of it is uglier. You're going to have to get used to a new way of living that's going to be completely different to the one that you come from in most cases. Also, you've got to get used to learning things again as if you were a child, having to relearn processes that have become second nature to you in your country, having to wrap your head around systems that work completely differently to what you've become used to, having to accept the fact that you probably are never going to arrive at a position where you know everything about everything in Italy. And I think that this is actually really difficult. Now, I've been living here for nearly 8 years, and I have to say that although I feel a lot more confident now in certain areas of my life, there are still things, particularly concerning bureaucracy, that I find difficult, that I cannot wrap my head around, processes and systems that don't work in the way that I think, based on the experiences I've had in my life, they should. And I really feel that this is hard. Like even now, if I have to do something related to bureaucracy, I have this feeling of anxiety within myself because I feel like I don't know everything that I need to know about what I have to do. And I don't think that feeling ever really goes away, because you can become more confident in what you're doing, but then you move to a different region in Italy and you realize that they do things completely differently. So you never feel like you are on top of what you need to know in order to live your life and set your life up fully here. Now, it's not to say that you don't get comfortable, of course. I feel like I'm at a point in my life now where I feel settled. However, there are elements of your life when you're kind of starting over that make you feel this process is never going to end. You're always going to feel like you are learning something for the first time or having to improve your knowledge of something as well. I don't think you ever arrive in kind of a comfort zone bubble that you typically tend to be in when you're in familiar surroundings in your own country. And this is really, really tough. And people do not talk about this enough. People focus so much on the positive aspects of starting over, but there is this side as well that you need to prepare yourself for, because I think for me, this aspect has caused me the most stress, particularly in the first couple of years, trying to adjust to things that were so completely different in terms of working culture, the way contracts were issued, pay and conditions. Also trying to adjust to the way that processes are dealt with here, and trying to wrap my head around the fact that it's not just going to be as simple as opening a laptop for every single aspect of my life. And so it's difficult. Language barriers also, play a part in that as well, not fully understanding everything, because translations here are not really a common thing. You will find that some government websites will offer the translations into English, but when you go in person to these offices, it's very rare that you will ever come across somebody who speaks in English. So you have to completely immerse yourself into setting up your life, and it's not always as smooth sailing as you may have hoped it to be. The second aspect that reveals kind of the darker side of living in Italy, shall I say, is that when you start living here, you will realize that your personality evolves, and you may even lose your personality in the most extreme circumstances, which is what happened to me. Now, I will say that there's actually been some studies conducted over the years focusing on whether or not people's personality changes when they speak in another language. Because as I'm sure you are very well rehearsed in now, you must speak Italian when you live here in Italy, because unfortunately, and I do say unfortunately, I take a stand on this. It's a shame, but English is not spoken enough here. And I find that Italy sometimes feels very insular. It focuses on its own language and its own culture and customs. And sometimes it's to the detriment of people that live here, because people that want to study and learn English literally have very little opportunity to practice it and put it into, practice in real life situations, because everything here, even international films, movies, are all dubbed over into Italian. I think coming from London, which is a multicultural city, to the point where you will see things translated into different languages, you will see different restaurants from all around the world. I kind of found it quite difficult coming here and it literally just being like Italy. And although you can see aspects of other cultures here, particularly in the southern parts of Italy, I would say that it does feel quite insular at points. And particularly if you want to try different cuisine in different restaurants, or you want to use English, you realize very quickly how people here a lot of the time live in a bubble, with the greatest of respect. But I feel like I have to be honest about that element. Because you see, one of the studies that was conducted in 2006 revealed that looking at Spanish English bilinguals, people scored differently on personality tests depending on which language they were using, coming across as more outgoing, open, and emotionally stable in English than in Spanish. The researchers put this down to a concept called cultural frame switching, which means that when you change language, you unconsciously slip into the mindset and norms of that culture too. Now, I would say that I completely concur with this study that was conducted in 2006, because I find that when I do speak in Italian, when I get over the blocks that stop me from doing so, I find that I adopt like the mannerisms, the movements, the hand gestures. The hand gestures, I can't stop. They're like a part of my life now. But I find that I have like different aspects of my personality that reveal themselves when I speak in Italian compared to when I speak in English. So you have to prepare yourself for the fact that your personality is going to go on a bit of a journey when you live here. I almost think it is the biggest shame to think that you can move to Italy and stay the same person for the entire time that you're here. You almost want to go on that journey, but it's just to tell you that this will happen. I think it comes as a shock to people when they move here and they don't expect that their personality is necessarily going to evolve or change when they're living here. And sometimes you can look back on yourself and not recognize who you were when you first moved here, because you've gone through so many different transformations. But it can often end up to the extreme where you completely lose who you are. Now, this is something that I experienced, because when I first moved here, I've made no secret of the fact that I was terrible in that I didn't move here with enough of an understanding of the Italian language. And it's my biggest regret, because I think that I made my life unbearably difficult for the first couple of years as a result. And this is why I always preach on this channel now: do not make the same mistake as me, learn Italian. But essentially, I would sit at tables with large groups of people, and people were friendly and open in their gestures, but I had very little understanding of the conversations that they were having. They would do their best to translate. But essentially, I found myself slowly disappearing and kind of blending into the wallpaper. And it got to the point where, because I really wasn't able to keep up with conversations, I wasn't able to understand everything. At some point, people just forget that you're there. You're there in person, but you're not contributing. So people don't really include you as much at a certain point. And I remember feeling like I had just didn't know who I was anymore. I'd moved here quite a confident person, um, able to speak very easily in situations, loved talking, to somebody who was just silent the majority of the time, having to translate everything and not really able to express my personality in the way that I wanted to. And it was so difficult for me at the beginning. And goodness knows what people thought of me at the beginning, because I think, maybe some people thought I was strange or whatever. I could understand it, right? But now, nearly 8 years in, I can say that I feel so much more confident in myself. I'm able to express myself more, and I just feel a completely different person. But I had to go through that process of losing myself to realize that I had to find myself here. I had to find the Italian version of myself that existed here to allow me to adapt and integrate myself into the culture. And I feel like that's the point that nobody really talks about. You may very well lose yourself here because you find it so difficult to fit in. You've moved here thinking that everything is going to be easy from the beginning, that you're going to have those conversations with people, that you're going to form those connections. Everything takes time when it comes to connections here, but it takes even longer if you're not able to express yourself and people are not able to get to know you on that level. And so I feel like that is the dark side of living in Italy and setting up your life here, in that your personality is going to go through changes. That can be positive, absolutely, but it may result in the fact that you lose yourself altogether. And I think in those kinds of moments, you have to recognize the changes you've got to make to improve yourself. For me personally, I found things that made me feel like me again. I started this YouTube channel. I got back into some of the original interests and hobbies that I'd had when I lived in the UK. And I slowly but surely started to feel a bit more like myself again. I think when I moved here with this mindset that I had to integrate. I had to fit into Italian life. And a lot of people feel the same way. But essentially, sometimes there's a price that you pay for that kind of attitude, in the sense that you forget who you are and the things that originally lit you up before you moved here. So I think it's all a careful balance, but essentially recognizing that your personality is going to go on a journey is completely normal. But you want to make sure that you nurture your personality when you're living here, and you don't end up at the point where you completely lose it. The third aspect that people don't really talk about, which represents the darker side of living in Italy, is that feeling that you are constantly the outsider. I don't think this changes. I think that you become more comfortable with your life here, absolutely, at a certain point, but you are always, in the eyes of Italy, in the eyes of the state, going to be an outsider. You are the stranieri. You realize this when you have to go and renew any bureaucracy documents, that you are a foreigner. You are an outsider to Italy. And I feel like this is difficult to get used to at times, but not just from a bureaucratic point of view, but also from the point of view of not having connections here. When you move to Italy, if you don't have family here, if you don't have existing connections or ties to this country, people don't know anything about you. Like, you are like this weird person that's decided to move to Italy in the eyes of most people here. And so people are not trusting in you from the very beginning. They are a little bit wary of you. They may not open themselves fully up to you at the very start because they just don't know enough about you. Life here in Italy, especially in the south, is really centered on connections. You find that people have connections going back years, even to when they were at school. And so there's you arriving into a town or a city or wherever you decide to move to with absolutely zero connections in Italy. People are immediately a little bit cautious of you. It's just natural for the culture here, I think. What I will say though is that it makes you feel uncomfortable sometimes. At the beginning, I definitely felt this more. Now I just embrace my life more, and I don't try to use like glossy terms like expat, because this is another thing with this. I feel like sometimes when we are trying to process the fact that we are starting our life over in a new country, that we are having to adjust to a new culture, that, we are different to the people that live there. Sometimes people use this glossy label of expat in a way to make themselves feel more confident about their decision and more, I don't know, at ease with their situation. But the fact is, we are all immigrants. We have all chosen to live in Italy, if it's long term, absolutely, as an immigrant. And I used to lean into this expat label a lot, most notably because it was like the social norm to say that you were an expat. And if I wanted to reach people who had a similar vision of to live in Italy, I had to use this term to do so. But I guess with with age comes wisdom, and with the time that you spend living in Italy, you realize the reality. You are totally an immigrant when you're here. You have to go to the immigration office to deal with any kind of bureaucracy issues. So you're never going to escape that side of what your life is like. And nor do I think you should, because I feel like it's an aspect of life that you need to embrace. You have chosen to move to Italy. You have to accept that you are always going to be a little bit different to people around you. And hopefully, for the most part, people will be accommodating. But it's that feeling on the edge that isn't always comfortable to sit with. And as much as you might think, well, it's okay, I'm living in Italy, I'm living out my dream, I've got all of the things around me, the Dolce Vita, all of that beautiful stuff going on in my life. When you feel like an outsider, you can often feel quite lonely. And I feel like I experienced that at the beginning. I was lucky to start to make connections when I first moved here, but there were still points where I felt very, very different in family situations, in social contexts. I would feel totally strange, not just because I was still kind of battling with the language at that point, but also because my upbringing, my background was so different to the majority of people that I was surrounding myself with that I didn't think they could relate to me, and vice versa. So it's not easy being an outsider. And it's just something that I think you have to accept you will experience at some point, and maybe you will always feel a little bit different when you're here. It's not to say that you don't embrace the culture and you're not integrating. This is not where I'm going with this, but it's just that inner feeling that you don't have family roots here, you don't have long-term friendships here. It does make you feel different, and you notice it more with the Italian culture because they are so centered on family and friends that when you come from another country, yes, you can make friends here, yes, you can build your life eventually, you're always going to feel a little bit different. I think it just never really leaves you. The fourth aspect, which to me reveals the darker side of living in Italy, is that there might be points where you forget about aspects of your own identity. Now, I guess this can tie a little bit into personality, which we spoke about at the beginning, but for me, it comes down to language. Now, of course, as I've said before, people don't really speak in English here. And so for the first couple of years, I lost aspects of my own language. So I come from London, and, Londoners have a particular way of speaking. We have different kind of phrases and expressions that we'd use. And I remember it was 2021. So I'd been living here for 3 years. And I discovered a YouTuber who was from London. And I literally remember to this day commenting on her video going, "Oh my goodness, another YouTuber from London." And it sounds crazy because, of course, there's loads of other YouTubers from London. But at that moment in my life, 3 years into living in Italy, having not really been surrounded by anyone, I think, that had come from London at that point, it was like incredible to hear another London accent in my ears and to hear somebody who sounded a bit like me. When I go back to London, I hear people speaking. And I remember there was one moment, and it stayed with me ever since because this just highlights exactly what I'm talking about. It was like a conversation that I was witnessing maybe on a train. I don't remember where I was in London, but this guy was literally like, "All right, mate, how you doing?" And I was like, "All right, mate, I've not heard that for such a long time." And it sounds ridiculous. I get it. But when you live in Italy, particularly if you're teaching English here in Italy, you are teaching the proper English. And so these kinds of expressions, "All right, mate, how you doing?" Like, like really kind of relaxed, informal terms, you don't really ever use here, and you don't have the opportunity to use. And so I do think you lose and forget aspects of your identity. I would also say as well, like cuisine. Now, this is not really an aspect of my identity that I'm sad to have lost because I've made no secret of the fact that my diet has improved tenfold since living here in Italy. But of course, I don't really cook British food anymore. And like when I go back, there will be certain things that I want to eat because I miss it. But I have to be honest with you, the list is decreasing the longer I stay in Italy. There's not so much that I miss anymore about food in the UK compared to when I first moved here. But also, not even that, like humor. British humor is very dry, sarcastic, even. It doesn't always work in Italian. And so you might say something really deadpan, and you're like, you've just got this dry sense of humor, and people think you're serious. Like, these are all things that you may not even consider, but you will at some point realize that your identity in Italy is totally different to how it is back in your own country. And you will realize that there are parts of your identity that you lose and forget about at the same time. So I feel like this is something that if you feel like you're not who you were when you moved here, and although that can be really great on the one hand, sometimes it can make you feel a little bit like, well, who am I now? Like, what about my culture, my roots? When I touched on the personality aspect earlier on in this video, I spoke about the fact that I lost myself. Well, part of that was because I was trying to kind of shed my British identity. When I moved here, I felt like I needed to go all in. And that meant, not really talk about my country, my culture, not really talk about the things that I used to do in my country, the TV shows I used to like, the food I used to eat. I just wanted to go all in and just embrace this new life. But it came at the expense of me forgetting about my own roots and identity, which is something that now I fully embrace. And I'm really proud to talk about my heritage, my country, my culture in a way that I just didn't really do at the beginning. So I feel like, again, something that people don't even consider, you will at points lose aspects of your old identity. And maybe that's a good thing for you, but it can feel a little bit unsettling, I think, when you arrive at the point where you're like, I don't even really remember parts of my culture anymore. And the fifth thing that I would say that represents the darker side of life in Italy is at some point when you've been living here, you arrive at a point where you're in this vague in-between space of not really knowing where is home. And it's really hard for me to express this sometimes, but I feel like London is my birth city. The UK is my home. However, I don't know what it means to live in London anymore. I've lived in Italy for nearly 8 years. My memory of life in London and living in London stems back pre-2018. Life was totally different then. So much has changed in that time, particularly in a city like London, where, every year there's something new that's happening, some major difference that I spot when I return. And so it's weird because I can say that London is my home city. Absolutely. It's where I was born and where I spent, 34 years of my life. But I no longer know it well enough to say that it is my home. And then we have Italy. I've been living here for nearly 8 years. I've gone through so much living in this country. I feel comfortable here now, finally, at this point. But is Italy my home? Well, according to Italy, no. I'm a stranieri. I'm an immigrant. So it's not my birth country. It's not a place where I have, family connections or roots. It's a place I feel comfortable in. It's a place that I've built my life in, but is it home? Because when you have events like this weekend is Easter, you notice that people are with their families and with long-term friends. And so you always have this moment of being like, this isn't really my home. And it's just a really weird place to be in, this murky middle, if you like, of like, where is home? Because when you've spent long enough in one country, you've forgotten about your old life in your old country, like the habits, the routines, what it really means to live there. Do you ever really belong anywhere? And this is really something that I do not think anybody really spends enough time thinking about. I certainly didn't at all when I first decided to move to Italy. But to be in this weird, murky middle space, I mean, I'm feel very happy. I'm comfortable in this murky middle, but it's a weird position to be in, like to live in a country where you don't have any roots, where you don't really know the heritage enough, like you're still learning, you're like a beginner, but then to reflect on your old life, which you don't really know anymore either. Like, you don't know if the shops that you used to go to when you lived there are still any good. You don't know if the restaurants are still great. You don't really know what it means to pay taxes in your country anymore and to go through the trials and tribulations that people are in the UK. It's just something you read in the news. So it's an interesting one. And I think overall, these 5 areas are things that reveal a darker side to living in Italy that people just do not share for whatever reason. But I wanted to talk about today because essentially your mindset is something that kind of encompasses all of these 5 aspects, but it's the single biggest thing that's going to make a huge difference to your life. And I think to your well-being is to focus on these kinds of things, to dig deeper than just the tick box exercise, which so many people concentrate on, and really consider what your life is going to look like here. And these kinds of things, because it's a holistic process moving to Italy, it isn't just like I've got my documents, tick, done. If you've enjoyed this video, I think this is the one that you will like next, because I just explore this kind of philosophy even more about what it really means when you start living here in Italy. I will see you in the next video.